evening, everybody. Good Thursday to you. How are you? I hope everybody's staying warm and dry as much of the country is in the grips of wintry death. I am glad to see you, though, and I'm glad you've all made it here. And who am I, of course, to be glad? I am the Dungeon Delver, aka Bill Sylvie, bringing you live streams about all kinds of tabletop fun 5 nights a week. We have live Let's Plays, we have deep dives on classics, and yes, we have guests, and we have one tonight, and it's going to be a lot of fun here. We're going to bring him up in just a quick minute, but of course, before we get going, I do want to remind you that this live stream is brought to you by our friends at Hellebarde Games. Hellebarde makes the kind of adventures they'd like to play, whether it's for Castles and Crusades, for 5th edition, or the OSR. Old School is in play at the table with Hellebarde Games, and you can check them out at DriveThruRPG or on their website, hellebardegames.com. We do love us some Hellebarde Games. And of course, a quick reminder, folks, tomorrow night we will be live playing 1st edition Gamma World. We'll be irradiating, we'll be disintegrating, we'll be automating, but it's going to be a lot of fun. So hope you can all make it. Good evening to Vincent, Meteor Key Press, Wheeling Dragon. Hello, 0017335. Welcome. Welcome, everybody. So our guest tonight, he and I yammer at each other on Twitter a whole lot. He's a very interesting dude, and I don't want to step too much on any cool tales, but he's an author. He is a PhD in all kinds of fun scientists. So without too much further ado, let's welcome tonight's guest, Timothy Imholt. We'll find out which he prefers in just a minute. Good evening to you, sir. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great. How are you?
I can't complain. And I could, but who'd listen, right?
Exactly.
So, Tim, tell us a little bit about yourself. You and I have bantered a little bit, for the benefit of the folks over in the chat. Introduce yourself.
So, I am a PhD. It's in experimental physics. And for people that don't understand the difference between that, but have seen the TV show, Leonard, not Sheldon. Okay, it's important to know. I spent probably the better part of a decade after I got my PhD up in New England at a university called MIT. I was research scientist side. I was never tenure track faculty, but the research is the more fun side anyway. Left that, went to the defense industry, worked on a little program called Patriot Missile. Now I work in predictive analytics and doing all kinds of fun things with trying to figure out how to take a large data set and tell you where to go. But on top of that, I write some books. So I've written a number of action thrillers, written a couple of more mystery novel kind of things, including one about a Catholic priest who decided that it was easier to be a serial killer and let some people just decide in the afterlife whether or not they'd be forgiven for their sins. But as a result, if you wind up either as a scientist or a writer, you wind up with this sort of obsession of reading. Started back in the 80s when I was actually started playing Dungeons and Dragons with 2nd edition in 83, 84 somewhere, whenever the Red Book came out. So I've been around playing that kind of stuff for a long time. Then it led to Dragonlance books. I started reading those when there were only 2 on the market, and I remember it being torture waiting for the 3rd one when you got to Dragons of Spring Dawn, and you're like, yes, it's finally here. And now some 200 books later, everybody's like, oh, so when did you start reading? And I'm like, so long ago, we won't even talk about that.
Right.
It's been fun so far, right? So it's kind of neat to get to see things as they've evolved, and being in the technology space, it's nice to live long enough to see it go from nobody knew what a modem was to now I just click internet, I just click on my web browser and I can get connected to kind of anything you want, right? It's
Right.
kind of a long way. And I don't think people realize this, but one of the fun calculations I did with my kids one day was I sat down and looked at the smartphone, and I said, okay, let's look at the amount of computing power on the Apollo 11 command module. And my Apple was far superior to every computer combined that was on Apollo 11. Right? So, and my kids were like, no way. I'm like, yeah, seriously. That's how weird it used to be. So
Yeah.
It's interesting times we live in.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And so you kicked off playing D&D. You said is the I guess as they named versions of D&D, basic D&D, yeah, the red box would have been the second one. You had the sort of magenta box that came out in 80, which replaced the dragon covered box in 77. So good times. It was a good time to be a kid into geeky stuff like computers or D&D back in those days. You know, we had a lot of very hands-on, you know. I'm sure you remember, if you wanted a good computer game, you had three options. You could go buy one, you could buy a magazine and type one in,
Yeah.
or you could come up with your own, and you know, start on Friday afternoon and end sometime Sunday night, and hopefully have something put together.
And we're using the term good computer game very loosely here, right? Because
Yes.
they were text adventures like Zork and things we defined as good. If you wanted to play the good stuff, you'd get on your bike and ride to 7-Eleven with quarters.
Yeah.
Like, now I've got a copy of Miss Pac-Man in my living room. So
Right.
you know, it was what it was. It was a much different time to kind of be a kid.
Mhm.
And I'm convinced that if they had Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter back then, I would never have another job ever because of the stuff I would have wound up posting. But that's a good thing that one didn't exist.
Right. I think we should all be happy that certain floppy disk based bulletin boards have probably been consigned to landfills and tossed
Thank
out.
goodness.
You know, there's,
Thank goodness for that.
yeah, exactly. Now, I mean, my digital footprint on Usenet starts around 1989, and I'm not super proud. You know, it's like, what do I have to pay somebody in Google to just drop a couple of disk sectors for me, right?
Yeah, accidentally lose those sections, right?
Yeah.
But it's interesting. You guys are playing Gamma World tomorrow. It used to be one of my favorites. It was
Oh,
sort of
yeah.
a go-to for a long time. And it's interesting one of the reasons I actually became a scientist, and this is my late father used to explain this to anybody who'd listen, was, he took me to this weird movie when I was a kid called Star Wars when it came out in the theater the first time.
Whatever happened to that? Did that ever go anywhere or anything?
Little actor named Harrison Ford or something was in that one. Yeah. Anyway, and my dad said my sister came out of it going. She was scared that the guy got his arm cut off in the bar, and she was afraid of things blowing up in space now. And I was like, okay, how do spaceships work? I want to understand this, right? So I came out with 58 questions, and apparently never stopped asking them. And one of the fun parts of my career was when I actually worked on a project that wound up in space. My dad was like, "So can you stop asking me how the stuff works now? Can I ask you some questions?" I was like, "Yeah, okay." A little bit different world.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I was just going to mention some of the audience get the dial-up BBS stuff. Vaughn mentioning 300. My first modem for my VIC 20 had a little throw toggle on it that was, you could either run it at 300, or if you needed to, you could knock it down to 110. You know.
So here's one for you. My first computer was a TRS-80 Model 2.
Okay.
The storage device was an audio cassette drive.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yep.
how far back I go with these things. So 300 baud modems were like way in the future at that point.
Yeah, you'd go into a Radio Shack and get your TRS-80, and you'd get the realistic cassette player.
Yeah, it came with a little monitor that only displayed in green. Yeah, it was
yeah.
So,
Good times. But anyway, so you went into physics. You did big science, but you've also you as you said, you've done some writing. I've seen a couple of your book titles up when you mentioned them on Twitter. Now you have an Amazon page, right? Or do you?
I do. I also have an author page. You can just go to timothyimholt.com and it links you around to kind of everything. You'll also find all my reviews of all the Dragonlance books I've been rereading with my kids and kind of whatever other yammerings are on my blog. But if you click the little link that says books, you'll see all my books. Also, you'll see a list of patents I've had issued over the years. I think I've got 23 of them now. And some papers I've written, I didn't include all my academic papers there because it would just be too weird of a list. But I've had papers in everything from the proceedings to the National Academy of Sciences to physical review to, you pick it, it doesn't, just academic papers. The coolest one I ever worked on, though, was a project for the Army. We were trying to help figure out how to prevent traumatic brain injuries in soldiers.
Mhm.
So actually, as a physicist, got to publish an article in a journal called Neuroimage because we were actually building models of the human head. And we discovered some things about the human head that had never really been studied too carefully by doctors. So we actually got an article in Neuroimage somehow, which I thought was kind of neat.
That is very neat. That is very, very neat. Um, Jack Photon commenting, Star Wars sounds stupid. A bunch of suns battling each other. Oh, like TV stars back in the 70s? Yeah. Jack's our resident Star Trek authority. We've had him on the show before. So you gotta root for the home team. I get it, Jack. It's all good, man.
I grew up watching Star Trek too, right? The rule in my house was you could actually eat dinner in the living room if you got there before the show started and you were actually interested in what was on. If you wanted to just go eat and show up mid-show, Dad would never let you eat in the living room. So and Star Trek was one of those things I used to kind of show up for every time. That and Battlestar Galactica, the original version.
BSU. Okay, so were you bummed out when they were doing the Battlestar Galactica premiere and they cut away for like 2 hours for the for the Carter meeting Bagan and Sadat? Oh, that just
Yeah,
yeah,
total crap, right? I mean, it's like forget it.
right.
Give us something we care about. Not who cares about the president? Print the paper tomorrow. Who gives a shit?
Yeah, yeah. My old man will be reading about this in the Gadsden Times tomorrow. Come on.
So, so for the Star Trek guys, I will give you this one for fun. I was out at a dinner with my fiance and some people the other day, and this when you're a physicist, sometimes people will say, "Oh, you're a physicist, great. I have questions." It's always like some quantum string theory thing that I have to do really advanced math to show you how it works, and nobody understands the math but other physicists. Please don't take that wrong. But when you're dealing with triple integral calculus and partial differential equations and other bizarre stuff, nobody but us cares. Okay, that's just the way it works. But anyway, this guy showed up. He's like, "So, how much of that Star Trek stuff is real? Because I have this theory that the government really has transporters, and we have colonies on Mars using transporters, and we'll find out in 2024. The president's going to." I'm like, um, bartender,
Right.
going to need vodka for this conversation. So, yeah, it was an interesting one.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I did a very brief stint at NASA myself, and it amazes me, and like the behind the scenes stuff at the Cape is it's so fascinating out there. And I mean, literally you could work there for one day, one single 8 hour 9 to 5 shift. I don't care who you are. I don't care how crazy you are. It would disabuse anyone of the notion that there's any kind of, oh, we didn't go to the moon, or, this is fake or that is fake conspiracies, because I mean, no, I'm sorry. There's just no way. It just there's trust me, guys, the most shocking thing that you're going to find behind the scenes at NASA is that the networking, like the physical infrastructure, is the same wires. It's like the same copper wires when they put IBM 3750 terminals on people's desks. All they did when they switched to 10 base T was just put media converters on either end of the wires.
It's like anything else, right? So it's like, and by the way, Robert who asked, no, I've never tried to create a Kelly LeBrock simulator like in Weird Science. And if I could figure out how to, I would, and I would be marketing the crap out of that one. But anyway, it's funny. Like when you work someplace like MIT or NASA or others, you look at some of the technology and you're like, wow, this is really junk. But you forget that it's the first one of those that had ever been built, and the first one always looks like crap. Right? So the fifth one looks great. The fifth one works much better, but the first one always looks terrible, and it's always held together with like duct tape, and you're never quite sure if it's going to work or catch on fire. It just depends on the day, right? So it was interesting. In fact, in my lab, when I was up there, one of the labs I worked in for a long time had a cyclotron that was actually used on the Manhattan experiment. And the
Mhm.
reason it was still in the lab is because it was so heavy, nobody was going to move that damn thing. And it was there till the building came down. That's just the way it worked.
Yeah.
But you looked at it and it's got like weird wires coming out of places, bridging them into others. And you're like, okay, everybody, when we turn it on, step back because we're not sure what's going to happen. It was an interesting place to be. But
Sure.
yeah, anyway, so the reason we started this conversation, I think the reason we wanted to have this talk was I started posting a bunch of stuff about Tom Clancy, which I kind of started to reread a bit of recently.
Mhm.
I did mention, was it the Red Storm Rising game and how that developed from one spot to another. And I actually was watching a couple of things, and the reason I started rereading Tom Clancy books, and it kind of became interesting to me, and I am the furthest thing on the planet from a conspiracy theorist. I am. As a scientist, you just kind of have to be. But by the same token, you always look for evidence or proof of things. You don't really go in preconceived notions, or at least you try not to. I will, however, disavow anybody of transporters sending people up to Mars. That's not happening. It But the Tom Clancy conspiracy theory that actually got me thinking there might be something to it was he lived very close in between kind of the Naval Academy, Naval Intelligence, Langley. I mean, he lived around a bunch of intelligence guys. And if
Mhm.
you read through his books, he was either really good at sitting down in the library and getting really freaking lucky on how close he came to some technology, or people were feeding him shit. It was one of those two. I don't know if they were doing it on purpose. I'm not saying he worked for the CIA, but was he maybe an asset where they feeding him stuff so he could publish it and scare the Russians? But if you look at it, he was just dead on some things, including one where there was a space laser, and the trouble he described is the exact problems you'd have trying to develop a space laser. And from a technical perspective, when I read that book, I'm like, holy crap, he was dead on. And for
Mm.
a guy who spent his entire career as an insurance salesman to get that freaking close, I was just like, good lord, he's being fed this information by somebody. I I'm not saying he was. I have no evidence of it, but it wouldn't take a whole lot to convince me that he was being fed stuff from somebody.
Well, I do know that he did delve a little bit into tabletop gaming, like when he and Larry Bond wrote the excellent Red Storm Rising. And guys, if you've never read Red Storm Rising, I highly recommend you avail yourself of it. It is the Lord of the Rings of techno thrillers. That
It
is a
really is. It
phenomenal book.
Yeah, it's possibly one of the best techno thrillers I've ever read, and it's one of those things you sit down to start to read it and you don't realize it's 2 in the morning because you
Yes,
just keep going. It's one of those.
so many times I would buy new Clancy hardbacks. I worked in a mall. I'd leave the record store. I'd go down. There's, I remember when Some of All Fears rolled out. Uh, I worked an 8-hour shift. I brought that book home. I went to bed at like 3:15 the next morning, having just eaten that book up. Um, but I mentioned this to you on Twitter, and this is something that a friend of mine was serving in the Navy, and Clancy came on and he toured. Oh, was it My Buddy in the Sub, or was it somebody on this on surface? I don't remember, but they said, okay, this compartment everything in there is classified. We can't show you what's in there. And he got a little obstinate about it, according to them, and was like, well, what is in there? I mean, okay, I can't go in there, but tell me what's in there. And they just kind of were like, we can't tell you what's in there. And he kind of played the don't you know who I am card, you know. So
That's those are always fun situations to be in, right? Because I've worked on some of those programs where people are like, I should have a right to be in there. I'm like, yeah, but I'm going to tell you that you don't, right? So
yeah, yeah.
it's a whole different world. And honestly, the stuff I worked on was some of it was classified top secret, but it's far less interesting than people give it credit for. Everybody's like, "Oh, the mysteries of the thing." I'm like, "Yeah, but you know what? It's not that crazy." The one I worked on that truly frightened didn't necessarily frighten me, but it actually led to a book. Was I was working on this project once because I was a nuclear physicist and I worked a lot with particle detection. And I was working on this project to see if we could build sensors that the Navy kind of uses. Um, and Casino Royale is the answer to the James Bond question, by the way. But
Live and let.
Live and Let Die. It's probably I love this. Absolutely the best James Bond theme song. But anyway, it. I was working on this project to detect neutron radiation, and the reason they wanted to detect it was partially for a Navy project, partially for a NASA project for the space station, and partially to detect smuggled nuclear weapons and also or smuggled nuclear material that could be used to build a weapon. And my first question was: is this really a problem? Are we really trying to build a sensor to detect a smuggled nuclear weapon? And is that actually an issue? Right? And I dug deep enough into it that I got to the point where I'm like, yeah, let's work on this project. Right? It's one of those moments of okay, I get it. And it wasn't that I had access to any classified stuff that said, hey, this actually is a problem and we came close, blah, blah, blah. What I discovered was actually in public information that the US has actually lost. We don't know where they are, 6 or 7 nuclear warheads, just somewhere. One of them's
Yeah.
in a swamp in the Carolinas. And after the breakup of the USSR, who knows how many of those have gone missing, right? So the stuff is out there somewhere.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah. I don't. I don't think the Russians know how many weapons. There was a case. There's a channel on YouTube, and if you haven't seen this, I highly recommend it. And anyone out in the audience, it's called Plainly Difficult. And this guy reviews industrial disasters, military disasters, sometimes public disasters, things that have led to very sometimes extremely tragic events. Chernobyl's one he's covered, the Bhopal chemical spill at Dow in India, or Union Carbide rather. But apparently somebody in Russia in the late 1960s got it in their head that for remote work sites where you couldn't run power lines and trucking in oil and gas would be a giant pain in the butt, the best thing to do would just be parachute in RTGs to power remote weather stations.
yeah.
So scattered across the former Soviet Union, nobody really knows where they all are a bunch of radiothermal generators just sitting there being plutonium.
So RTGs, for people that aren't familiar with them, okay, are batteries essentially that just work on a heat source. So you just take heat and convert it to electricity. Overwhelmingly, what people use to do that is plutonium because it stays warm for a really long time. Okay. So yeah, you could build a battery that lasts 20 years if you have enough plutonium inside of it. And it's not going to produce a lot of current, but it'll last a really long time. The trouble is, what do you do with that plutonium, right? If somebody gathers up enough of those things, you could do something really nefarious with it. And it's an interesting thought that those things are actually out there someplace.
Yeah. The particular one he was talking about, a group of metal salvagers found one, and they didn't crack it open. They were like, we got to haul this thing out of here. They're like, hey, this is really warm. We can camp here tonight till we can haul it up the side of the hill. So they snuggled around it, and well, the next morning they all woke up with ARS.
So
yeah.
The other thing people may not realize is plutonium is an interesting psychological weapon because you can make things that go boom with it. But technically, when you have a piece of it in a lab, it glows. It has a tendency to flake off and have things float around the lab, which you don't want to have happen outside of a controlled environment because 1 gram of the stuff, if you accidentally breathe it in, is fatal. Right. So technically, it's more because you can't get enough people stacked close enough together. Technically, it's more lethal as a toxin than it is as an explosive. So you drop a couple grams around subway systems someplace, and next thing you know, you've actually got a whole lot more dead people than if you set up bombs with it. One's a whole lot more interesting as a psychological weapon, but it actually is more dangerous as a toxin. And
Yes.
if you could use it to power a DeLorean, I would buy a DeLorean.
Exactly, time traveling DeLoreans, which brings us nicely around to a Tom Clancy topic, which I promise audience we're going to talk about. And I mentioned this earlier, Sum of All Fears,
Mm-hmm.
where you had Clancy tackling what is called in American military parlance a broken arrow, where a nuclear weapon is lost. We have, like Tim said, we've got like 6 of them. One of them is somewhere in the Sea of Japan, strapped to underneath an A4 Skyhawk. There's one
in a Carolina swamp someplace.
Yeah, there's one in the Carolina swamp, one just off the coast. I don't remember if Thresher and Scorpion were armed when they went down.
But yeah, there's a few of them floating around. Right? And not just due to accounting errors, right? So sometimes the government loses things because it just did the math wrong, or it did some paperwork. I mean, these are known to have just been accidentally dropped out of airplanes, and we couldn't find the damn things.
Yeah.
So they're just out there, and we're not the only country that's had those kind of oopsie moments. So.
Yeah. And thus the premise of Sum of All Fears, for those who may not have read it or seen the film, the Israelis being pushed to the brink in the 67 war had alert aircraft armed with battlefield nukes, tactical nukes, and they one of those birds was mistakenly launched and shot down, and its payload literally just went tumbling through the sky, landing in southern Syria and being covered up by a farmer who thought it was, okay, that's a piece of a wrecked airplane. And so he just covers it up, and then later terrorist groups find it, and things go from bad to worse there.
Yeah, because the premise was pretty simple. They said, the Russians found it, and so actually it was a big group of fascists found it or something, and wanted to build a nuke nobody knew about, right? Because if you could build if you steal a nuke, there's a lot of checks. There's a lot of people that actually inventory those things on a regular basis. You steal one that exists and that's already been accounted for, people are going to find out. But if you have one nobody knows you have, there's the tricky part, right? It's to have one that nobody realizes exists, set it down someplace, and somebody asked if it was in a football game. Yes, it was a football game. And set it off outside, or inside a stadium, right? So can you knock out AT&T Stadium during a Cowboy game, or pick your favorite team? And that was kind of the premise of the book, and what happens in the surrounding area and what happens in the aftermath to that, because it doesn't necessarily have to be a big nuke to really scare the crap out of people. Because there's 2 types of nuclear weapons. There's fission and fusion. Fission devices are the smaller of them, which are measured typically in kilotons, and then the fusion devices just get sort of arbitrarily large. Those are the big multi megaton devices. They get up to like 60. I think the biggest one the Russians ever set off was like 65 megatons. But it basically wiped out an atoll in the South Pacific. It killed the whole thing. And fusion is just a whole different world than fission. Fission is the easier one to build. Those are the ones we dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And if you've seen the movie Sum of All Fears, that was what they were building, was a plutonium device, which was what we dropped on one of the 2 Japanese cities. And the only thing we tested during World War II was plutonium. Uranium devices are so easy to build. The world's first test of it was actually in Japan, because people just knew it was going to work. The ones we always tested were plutonium devices. Uranium, we just sent it over and blew it up. So it was an interesting thing.
Yeah. So yeah, Clancy's book dealt with that, but that's one of the things. And by the way, just a quick mention for whoever's forced to run my videos through your monitors at YouTube. We're talking about books and fiction. Just FYI. Okay. Don't send me a nasty email, please. I beg of you.
No. Tom Clancy books, and Sum of All Fears is around here somewhere. So it's
yeah.
Yeah,
Robert says, "Are those brief?" No. The smallest nuke they've got is the SADM, and it is about half the size of a 55-gallon drum.
yeah. But the thing is, and this is what I used in my book because I actually have a book that involved nuclear weapons. Is with 1940s technology, it was difficult to deliver. With modern shipping and logistics, it's not. It's half the size of a 55-gallon drum. You could FedEx it.
Yeah, yeah.
And if FedEx isn't paying attention or they aren't scanning everything and they're not, too much stuff comes through. You could deliver it to the right next door to the White House, right, and just set a timer on it and go, right. So that was sort of the premise for my book, The Last World War, which was kind of my nuclear version of a war. Yeah, they're small. The briefcase ones are they're not that small yet, but they're half the size. I could fit it in the trunk of my car. So yeah,
Yeah.
they're not briefcase size, but they ain't huge.
Scary stuff. Scary stuff.
Yeah.
But so what is your favorite Clancy novel? I know what mine is, but what's yours?
So there's two answers to that question. So let me answer that question three different ways because I've actually been looking at a lot of Tom Clancy stuff lately, including watching all the movies again. Because on my YouTube channel, I've been doing a lot of things about page to screen. Like, so what I've been watching a lot of movies that were books and kind of looking through and doing some YouTube videos on those. And because one of my books I'm writing a screenplay for and it's being considered by some people, so I'm paying careful attention these days about good adaptations of books because I'm hoping one of mine becomes a movie. But my favorite of his is somewhere between possibly Red Storm Rising and Without Remorse. I know it's sacrilege. That's neither of those are Jack Ryan books, but
Mm.
I think those are some of his best work. Jack Ryan, I think, is a great character, and he carries across a whole bunch of books very, very well. And I've read all of them up through the Jack Ryan Jr. stuff. I haven't read all of that. But I've read all the stuff Tom Clancy actually wrote. Now that Tom Clancy's passed away and he's got new books coming out, I can't say I've read all those.
Mm.
Read some of them. But so those two are probably somewhere in the top of my list. Now, favorite actor to play Jack Ryan, I got to go with Harrison Ford just because he's a fantastic actor and I don't think he get much better.
Mhm.
Now, if you want to talk about favorite movie, best adaptation of him over to film, I think is still Hunt for Red October. Just because it had the cast to end all casts, right? And it was
Yeah.
probably the best job Alec Baldwin ever did in a movie. He did a
Oh,
great Jack Ryan. It was spot on, but you had everybody from him to Sean Connery. I mean, just star after star after star was in that thing. And I don't think there's a better Jack Ryan. The adaptation was probably the best adaptation I've seen. And yes, I know the new series is out there. I've seen the new series, and just because you call him Jack Ryan doesn't make him Jack Ryan. But you did really have to update it for modern audiences, so I
well.
get that one.
So for me, for book, I would have to go with I got to go with Patriot Games. Patriot Games is probably my favorite Clancy Ryan book.
I like that one because it's really personal for Ryan, right? So it kind of brings it in. It's not about some big international espionage thing that he just happens to get caught in the middle of. This is him personally. His family is actually at risk in that thing. And to me, that one really does a lot for bringing out Jack Ryan the human.
Yeah, and I think that's why I like that one. So it's a gritty book, you know. There is police procedural levels of grit in it, not where somebody can just go into an op center, point a satellite at a thing, and say send 50 Delta Force guys there,
Yeah,
and
it's all
we
different.
make thing go away. This is, you know, uh, his wife is critically injured in the book. Sorry, guys, it's a 40-year-old book. You should have read it by now. But
Yeah,
you know, they attack his house. It's just it's a damn fine book.
yeah. They almost wind up killing his daughter at one point, and
Yes.
yeah, it was great. And to answer the question, Jack Ryan or Jason Bourne, you have to live in a world with both because they're completely different characters.
Yeah.
Jack Ryan is not Jason Bourne by any stretch of the imagination. Now, if you want to talk Jason Bourne versus Jack Reacher, we can do that, but it's a whole different episode of a podcast. So,
Maybe we can have you back on to talk about that one. I don't, as much as I love Red Storm Rising, and I adore Red Storm Rising, though I gotta say, it's un-Tom Clancy.
It is. It really. You can see that he was working with somebody he greatly respected because his voice was sort of minor in it. I won't say minor, but he also was very early in his career, so he was still kind of learning his craft as a writer, right? So I mean, Hunt for Red October was out; it was the only other book out there, but he still wasn't really Tom Clancy yet. And if you watch some of the old interviews with him, he really strove personally to kind of get better with every book and kind of raise the bar. And I think had it not been for Red Storm Rising and him working with somebody else on that one, I don't think he'd have been as good a writer in the later Jack Ryan stuff. I just don't. I think he learned a lot writing this book with Larry Bond. So
no, I definitely think there's something to do that. But I love getting into a book that puts an author in a position to have a different voice. Now we're talking about techno thrillers, Cold War techno thrillers. Let me ask you something. Have you ever read a book called Last of the Breed? And I'm not going to tell you the author. It's about a spy plane pilot who shot down over Siberia, and it's set in the 1980s. Do you know the book?
I don't, but it sounds a lot like. I don't know the book. I don't.
It is by Louis L'Amour, the Western
really?
author. Yes, the Sacketts, all those books. My dad, for years, God rest his soul, tried to get me, because I was reading fantasy and science fiction throughout my young life, and he said, "You really should check out Louis L'Amour. I think you'd like Louis L'Amour." And I had read Hunt, I had read Red Storm, and he gave me his copy of Last of the Breed to read, and I loved it. It was fantastic. It is it's a spy thriller with touches of survival in it. It's a really, really fine read. And I got interested then in other books that L'Amour had done that were outside of the cowboy genre. He did a fantasy horror novel called Haunted Mesa. He did a historical fiction that borders on fantasy, and there's no fantastical stuff, but if you like Dragonlance and that kind of thing, The Walking Drum. If you haven't read The Walking Drum, do recommend it to you. So yeah, that was really, really good stuff. Isn't a lot of Clancy ghost written? Well, it's ghost written now.
Yeah, dead for 10 years, right? So he, a lot of it was, and there were a number of paperbacks when he was alive that he kind of came up with the concept, all the power plays and op center books and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And then he kind of put his name on, right? But there's still that core group of 10 or 12 that are his, that are really the ones I enjoy the most. So a lot of the ones that came later that he wrote with somebody, or he kind of conceptualized and handed off to somebody, and certainly the ones now that are just written by somebody else,
right?
They're fun, right? But to me, they're just not. It's like you sort of take 20% off, right, of the quality of the book as it was. And honestly, after Jack Ryan, the books are sold at this point. I hope nobody cares if I give away something. But once Jack Ryan became president, what else do you really do, right? Where do you go after that? Yes, and I get it. He kind of reawakened it with Teeth and the Tiger when Jack Ryan Jr. kind of came into the mix. But I think by that point he was ready to retire, because I could tell you, after writing 7 books, it's a lot of work to write a book and edit the thing. And at that point he had $500 million in the bank or whatever, and he didn't really want to work all that hard. So he just kind of kept putting his name on things. And I get it. Right?
I think there's a tradition, whether you consider a fine tradition or not, of author emerituses who have done things like that. I mean, how many times have you seen, uh, oh, here's uh, uh, Rendezvous with Rama sequel by Arthur Clarke with Gentry Lee. No, Gentry Lee wrote the book. Arthur C. Clarke put his name on it.
Yeah, it's like somehow 15 years after Robert Ludlum passed away, we suddenly got a lot more Jason Bourne books. Well, guess what?
Yeah.
He didn't write them, right? He didn't even have input. But yeah, was it's I get it, and the thing as a writer that gets me kind of going once in a while, and all my stuff is indie published, but I've got more than 2,000 Amazon reviews now, and I think I've got a 4.2 star average, 4.1 star average, so not too bad.
Mhm.
But publishers have all kind of stuck together, right? So they've all kind of become one or two or three big publishing houses, and they don't want to take risks on new authors anymore. So it's better for a big company to take a lower risk and keep finding somebody to write another Tom Clancy book because they know they'll make money than it is for them to take a risk on somebody new and stick it out, right? So they're going with what they know works, which these days in the current market is self-help and political books, or seem to be all the rage. Or young adult fiction kind of gets put out. And if you go to any bookstore lately, you see this gargantuan, especially the used bookstores where I tend to hang out. You see this gargantuan paranormal romance section, and fine. Things like Twilight gave us that, and that's fine as long as people are reading something. I don't care. But what you find is that the action thriller, the sci-fi, and the fantasy world um, haven't really had too many breakout stars in the last 10 years. There's a few, but it's not like their publishing houses aren't really putting a lot of energy into finding that new Tom Clancy, right? And saying we're going to support this guy for a 30-year career. Because one of the reasons I thought Tom Clancy could have been a spook was, the Hunt for Red October was put out by the Naval Institute Press. Naval Institute Press never puts out fiction, right? I think it's one of like three or something they've done. And all of a sudden, this thing goes super mega bestseller. President Reagan was seen carrying a copy. It went fantastic. And then all of a sudden, he's picked up by Simon and Schuster or somebody. I forget who. But he got, and they supported him for 20 years. And nobody knew if he was going to be big or not. They just kind of had to put things around him. Was he a one trick pony, whatever, right? So they had to put a marketing apparatus around it and make sure he continued to be successful. And now, like I was talking to some agents today about my stuff because I got a new one I'm working on. And they're like, okay, great. So how many social media followers do you have? How much marketing can you do that we don't have to? And it's like the publisher's trying to offload all the hard work on somebody else. And I
Right.
get it. Right? I own a business myself. And if I could offload the hard work on somebody else, I would do it too. But I think it's taking the publishing industry and everybody's like, oh, people are reading less. People are reading less. That's why they aren't taking risks. Well, this is why, right? There's nobody new that we can all look forward to. And I can't think of a breakout. And I'm going to use a name that I know has been tried. So many people have tried to cancel recently, but it was a very popular author. When J.K. Rowling was writing Harry Potter,
Hmm.
you know, people waited for those books and lined up forever to get their
Oh yeah.
copy of the thing, right?
No, you're
And I don't.
absolutely
When was the last time that happened? J.K. Rowling is the most recent one I can think of. Right? There's not been that. You go through the airport and everybody's carrying a copy of the thing. Because there was a time you couldn't walk into a restaurant and not see a Tom Clancy book someplace. I mean, they
uh,
were everywhere.
maybe the author of the Hunger Games. Her name eludes me.
Susan Collins, but yeah, maybe right, but that's what 15 years ago now, 10 years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and though that I think had it not been for the movies, I don't think we would have seen quite as much of that. But yeah, George R. R. Martin. But see, George R. R. Martin, yeah, he lost interest in his books, but I don't remember anybody waiting in line, right? And I've been reading his stuff since way before not way before, but shortly before the show started. But I don't remember people going, yeah, the new one's coming out. I'm going, and I know Amazon has killed some of that because you can pre-order and it shows up at your house at day release. But um, I've been writing books for 10 years. I've been following the publishing numbers. People just don't read that much. And I think it's because there's like, when was the last time you saw any marketing for a book or any authors out doing a big press tour or a big book tour? They're not supporting it anymore. I mean, I've done book signings, and I've had, I wrote one book that was actually a nonfiction book, co-authored with a former NFL player who was part of a Super Bowl team with Roger Staubach, was on concussions because I worked a lot on concussions when I was still an academic scientist. And it was interesting to do book signings, but I guarantee you people were not there for my autograph. They were there for the football player's autograph. So
Sure.
that's okay. I get it. But, you don't get a lot of press as an author. You don't get a lot of people saying, yeah, let's go to the book signing, right? People show up, but not in the way they did for, Robert Ludlum, if you would have done Clive Barker when he used to do them, that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, I think, you make a good point. People would have been waiting for Martin's stuff if he'd managed to get his books written while the show was still on.
Probably, and he actually, I think he lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico or something. I'm actually out there once in a while, and I toyed with the idea once of trying to find a way to get a hold of him, because if you have a number of books out, actually other authors will respond to you more often than not, even famous ones. Because I actually got a signed copy of a book plate for my copy of my first edition copy of First Blood by David Morrell. So, and Morrell's a big action. If you don't know it, First Blood was a movie with Sylvester Stallone, and I've got
Right.
the first
Right.
edition of the book, which came out in 1972. And I was trading direct messages on one of the social sites with the author, and he's like, "Oh, I read one of your books," and I was like, "Great," and he's like, "Yeah, you could be better." I was like, "Oh, thanks." Right? But he gave me some tips, and it actually did help my writing. And he was right, but I was just impressed he read one of my books.
Yeah.
He read one called Forest of Assassins, which was a book about Navy SEALs in Vietnam, sort of my historic fiction about the Navy SEALs when they first kind of, I know they got their start in World War II as the other teams, but they were first called SEALs in Vietnam.
Mhm.
And I wrote a book about them. This is my first book back in like 2014, and he was impressed with it. The book sold 10,000 copies or something. It sold very well. But he read it and he was like, "Yeah, you could have done better in the following ways," and he was right. But First Blood is first off, it's pretty hard to find in first edition copy form now. But the thing about it that got me was that book really kind of modernized the modern action movies, right? Because before then you had things like Firefox that were sort of 70 minutes of story and 20 minutes of action. And First Blood took it the other way. You had sort of 20 minutes of story and 70 minutes of action, right? That movie just moves. And ever since then, movies have been a lot more action oriented than story oriented, culminating with The Expendables, which has absolutely no story worth a crap anyway.
Yeah.
Um, but they're fun movies to watch. But whereas you back in the 80s, you had, back to Tom Clancy, his books were, they seemed very action oriented, and some of them were, but it was really more, how do you figure out what's going on? It was more of the mysteries of how the intelligence service is going to figure out what the hell's going on. And as the
Mhm.
reader, you got to see both sides, right? So you got to see, hey, look, here's the bad guys doing this, and here's the good guys trying to figure it out, and here's us in the middle trying to, hey, good guys, go look over there, right? It was always fun. So. And the
Right.
movies are the same way, right? It's not nearly as much action as modern action movies, um, and it kind of dives deeper on the character side, which is why I truly did like the Jack Ryan streaming series.
Mhm.
But it wasn't Jack Ryan of old, right? It was Jack Ryan of new, and that's fine because you can't. Nobody's going to greenlight a series for a Cold War stuff right now. It's just not going to happen, right? So they did have to modernize the storylines, and that's fine. It was great. I loved all four seasons of it. I think it was well done.
Yeah. Yeah. The new Jack Ryan was pretty good. I mean, you kind of get like in your mind's eye, you sort of picture him maybe more as a Harrison Ford, Alec Baldwin. So it's a bit jarring to go over to something that's a lot more kinetic, if you will. But it was certainly fun stuff. It was absolutely fun stuff. So,
And yes, Vaughn, you're correct. John Rambo did die in the end of the book, and he didn't in the movie because when they ran test viewings of the movie, nobody liked the fact that he died, and they had to go film the back. They had two versions of an ending that they filmed. One was where he died, and one was where he didn't, because Sylvester Stallone didn't want to die. And when they did some test screenings of the part where he died, and they were like, yeah, that's the theaters hated it, so they wanted him to live, and that's why it changed, because they listened to the test audiences. And David Morrell, pointed something out in the commentary. I've actually listened to the whole commentary, and I've talked to him personally. He said something very specific. As an author, you have to remember that movies are not books; they're different. Right? So
Mhm.
when you take something from a page and put it on the screen, it's a different form of storytelling. The audiences are not the same in both places. So it you do have to make some concessions as an author that it might not come out exactly the way you pictured it, because it's going to make a pretty sucky movie. Which is part of the reason I really like the streaming stuff that's going on right now.
Mhm.
Because like if you take like the current Jack Reacher stuff, you've got 10 hours to really dive into a story, and that's really what it takes to convert a 300 or 400 page book if you want to do it properly, right? You need a
Yeah.
lot of stuff in the background. You can't do it in 90 minutes. If you're trying to convert, Red Storm Rising into a movie, what is this, 500-600 pages or something?
Yeah. Oh no,
Six
you
six hundred
have to
fifty pages.
you have
You
to do
got
Red Storm Rising in 3 seasons at 15 episodes per.
Yeah, you just can't fit it in 90 minutes. So Hollywood has to take those stories and just cut crap left and right. So when I was working on a screenplay to one of mine, you try to make a story that holds together for 400 pages or 350 pages, and then you're like, great, now put it into 95, right? You're like, holy shit, how am
Yeah.
I going to do that? Right? And it's an interesting task. And it's like, okay, what are we cutting? Right? You're pulling stuff out left and right, and but and maybe somebody can answer this on the chat. If I go to a movie and I see, oh God, it's 3 hours, I don't know if I want to commit to that. I'm going to complain. But if it's a 10-part streaming series, I commit to that in a second, right? So movies are different than streaming, which is why some of the best adaptations of things I'm seeing these days that are coming out in the modern world are books to streaming. It's not books to movies. It's books over to the streaming side. I think they're much more true to the books, and I think audiences are responding because Reacher is probably one of the most watched things on cable right now. I mean, it gets Paramount. They're filming season 3. They haven't even finished releasing season 2 yet, right? So it's doing quite well. So I think yeah, I think Vaughn said it. Movies tear apart books, but how else are you going to do it? Right? You can't have a 6-hour movie.
Yeah.
Lawrence of Arabia tried it. It didn't do very well.
And let's be honest. I mean, when you start getting outside of genres, people aren't going to sit for it. I mean, hey, if somebody told me that there was a secret cut of Lord of the Rings that was correct, but the movies are 6 hours each, do you want to go sit in a theater for 6 hours? If there's an intermission where I can hit the John, absolutely. But then that's like me and 8,000 other Tolkien nerds around the world. I mean, that's not gonna merit a re-release. And there's Tim's Amazon page if you guys want to check that out, and of course, TimothyImholt.com. You can scope that out. I just wanted to throw that up there before I forgot it. But I gotta mention this in passing because you probably know this, but some of you folks in the audience might not, as we were talking about First Blood. You know who they were originally talking to play John Rambo?
I actually do know that one.
You do know that. Does anyone in the audience know? I'll give you a hot second. I'll see if the next reply after graph paper there is no peeking on Wikipedia now.
Yeah, the miniseries was closer to the book. Yeah, okay.
Yes, yes. So it was Dustin Hoffman to play John Rambo.
They were actually out to Steve McQueen for a while too. So they were looking at a couple of people before Sylvester Stallone came along, and humorously, so the story goes, Sylvester Stallone didn't want to do it. He was like, no, 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 my fans won't, respond to me in that role. He didn't have very many fans at that point. Right? It was early on in his career. He'd done Rocky, but I don't think Rocky 2 wasn't even a thing yet. I mean, it was early in his career, and he was like, "No, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it." And somebody had to talk him into it. And I think he said it was Burt Reynolds or somebody. Was
What?
like, dude, just go do it. You get over with. It's not going to ruin your career. You'll be fine. and encouraged him to do it. And of course, it made his career, go ballistic after that, right?
Yeah.
So,
But yeah, now not too many people have seen it, but you might not think of Dustin Hoffman as, hey, big time action star, but Straw Dogs. Holy crap.
what was the Kubrick movie he was in? I'm gonna have to look it up.
Kubrick movie? No, it
Yeah,
wasn't.
not Kubrick.
On Man. Or are you thinking Marathon Man?
No, not Marathon Man. Apocalypse Now.
No. Hoffman wasn't in Apocalypse Now.
No, not as a big role. I thought he was in it somewhere. I'm gonna have to look this up on IMDb now. I thought he
No, no.
had a role in it, but not a big one.
But anyway, I wanted to pin this because Mercury Wells, going back to the Clancy thing, the Hunt for Red October, yes, it was based on a real incident. A Soviet surface combatant commander felt, and this was, I think this was just early Brezhnev regime. He felt that the Soviet Union had become too rigid, too not openly, gloriously socialist enough. And he was going to stage an uprising. And so he mutinied. And his point was not to leave the USSR. He was not headed to NATO. He was not headed to the West to betray his country. He was actually going to sail his ship to a major Soviet port, then give a speech over the radio to people in the city and say, I think, the Brezhnev regime is corrupt. Here's my thoughts on the matter. I've held forth. Do with me what you will. He didn't get that far. They did with him what they will. They caught him, and that was the end of his life.
Yep. You're right. It was Harrison Ford in Apocalypse Now. I was thinking of my apologies. Got a small part in the front of it. Yeah. But yeah, it was a real incident, and you're right. And a lot of weird stuff like that went on in the '80s, right? And the more I learned about this stuff in retrospect, that went on in the '80s, like before the Soviet Union broke up, we were close in a couple spots. Right? There were a couple times we weren't far off from missiles flying in both directions.
I mean, that was that's one of those you guys will have to go look up. But basically, we ran the entirety of NATO played a role-playing game over open radio channels where we pretended that we were about to attack the Warsaw Pact. And it was literally just, guys in the Pentagon and guys in the Ministry of Defense and all of our NATO allies. And they literally just played an RPG on the radio, not for fun, but as a communications exercise. The Soviets listening in onto it freaked out because they thought everything we were saying, we were getting ready to do. And they said, well, shit, nuke them. I mean, that's all we can do. And somebody finally woke up and said, our satellites show that none of their ships are where they say they are, and none of their we can see across the border, none of their divisions have moved. And it was a very near thing, Able Archer was. Yeah, and Wes had no idea. We just, they'll hear this and know that we're just playing let's pretend. Surely.
One of the things I'd love to see somebody write a book on, and somebody's going to say, hey, Tim, go do it. And I'm not going to do this one. Was all through the Cold War, I suspect we had a lot of spies inside our various scientific and engineering groups because of a little operation that wasn't really declassified until the 90s called Operation Paperclip, where we basically took a bunch of German scientists and engineers after World War II that were known Nazis, including von Braun, who was not a great guy. I mean, von Braun worked at a missile factory where they were building V2s, where they used to hang slow-working Jewish people out front and leave them hanging there for a couple of days to encourage other people to work faster. But Operation Paperclip brought those guys to the U.S. and put them to work here. And some of them worked up until, 96, 97. There were still some of them kind of hanging around. And I just wonder how many of those guys were still sending information back on where we actually were at versus keeping it a secret like they're supposed to.
There's a guy you can find clips of this. He used to be on the History Channel. They would do specials about firearms and about the Soviet and Russian militaries. He's a former Spetsnaz. His name is Sonny, and I'm going to mutilate his last name, but it starts with a P. Sonny Pazukias, I think. But to hear him talk, he doesn't have an accent. He has a very flat English-speaking voice. And he said they used to get in advance of officers being deployed to East Berlin or stationed along the inner German border. They used to get their names from sources in the U.S. who would leak them to them. And like their first night of deployment, they get on the PA system, and him and other Spetsnaz guys who had nearly perfect accents would say, hey, we'd like to extend a big Red Army welcome to Sergeant Timothy Imholt. Welcome, Sergeant Imholt, to the inner German border, and we hope you enjoy your stay here. If you have any thoughts that you'd like to share with our political officers, if you'd present yourself at one of our guard posts, we'll be more than and play these screwy mind games with these guys. Like, how did they know?
When I was in the Army, I was active duty Army before I went to college. I spent some time over in Asia, and I was in Okinawa a number of times. And it cracked me up that right off of the shore, right by the Army base we have there, you'll see these Chinese fishing boats that never move.
Right.
They're always in exactly the same spot, with little things that are conveniently kind of aiming towards the military base. It was funny. You'd see supply boats going out to the fishing boats, but they just never moved. So when we would walk from our car into the building, we were always just come up with bizarre stories to talk about, just in case they were hoping they were listening, just to mess with them, right? So it was
right.
It's like, just come up with kind of the weird. You get three guys walking together, and you never know what the hell's going to come out, right? Especially enlisted soldiers, weird topics come up. Especially some of my friends. We had some notorious practical jokes we played on each other. But it was an interesting time. So yeah, that kind of stuff goes on. I don't think people realize that it actually goes on. Like when I was working in the defense and aerospace sector, there's a funding group in DC that's now got a new headquarters. But it was called DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. I used to do a lot of work for them, and you could get off this subway stop and walk right across the street and get into DARPA. They do all the security checks. You do all these other things. But, if you had an idea that you were going in there to talk to them about, you'd fly into town, and there was a Starbucks right across the street. And everybody would always meet at the Starbucks and kind of sit there and chit-chat and kind of say, okay, we're going to go see this guy. And, my last name is Imholt. I'm not hard to find, right? I mean, there's not too many of them. And if you work with some other people in the physics field, there's some last names that stick out. There's some people who are known. And it cracked me up when I sat there and realized that, hey, everybody who goes to DARPA meets everybody for their group at the Starbucks across the street. And right next to it is a Chinese restaurant that's actually got everybody that works there is actually a Chinese citizen because it's owned by the Chinese government. Had some of the best food in the world, and all the waiters spoke impeccable English. Right? So I'm like, I'm wondering if there's a connection here. If the people that are always in there sipping coffee are just watching to see who comes through of the restaurant. I'm just saying.
Maybe, could be.
There's no coincidence here somewhere. So, yeah, it was some fun stuff.
Yeah, I had a friend whose father was stationed in the Berlin Brigade for a couple of years, and they actually used to play Dungeons and Dragons on their radio net. You'd have guys in towers, and they would do remote D&D. I can't help but wonder what what the Russians thought of that.
I know everybody's against virtual tabletops, but darn it, we started it back in the 80s.
We started, well, and I've said this before. I believe it was Tim Kask at TSR who got his job. He called up Gary for a rules clarification, and they talked on the phone, and the conversation turned into a D&D game. So they played D&D over the phone. And I mean, folks, this was back when like calling to the next county would be a long distance phone call that could cost you 15 cents a minute. Tim was in Minneapolis, Gary in Lake Geneva. So that must have cost a damn fortune. But at the end of it, Gary was like, well, you just want to come and work for us. So it worked out. It worked out pretty well for Tim Kask. But yeah, they played. We had virtual tabletop back in the day, or play by mail. PBM.
Yeah. Play by mail is the thing too.
My wife's father was a big Chit and Hex wargamer. He doesn't so much anymore. He's a PC gamer now. But when she was young, he had friends that he would correspond game with, the old Avalon Hill Chit and Hex war games, Kriegspiel, Squad Leader, not Advanced Squad Leader.
I used to play Third Reich with my dad all the time.
There you go. It's good stuff. But yeah, no, it was. It's play by distance RPGs and war games have been a thing forever. I mean, I think as soon as the first cadet realized that he was not going to be able to finish his Kriegspiel there in Prussian Academy, he probably sat down and he penned a letter and sent his moves off to somebody. So,
I used to play. This is how nerdy I am. When I was in the Army, I used to play chess with my dad all the time, and we played chess by mail. It was what it was, right? Because it was too expensive to make a phone call at the point in time. And yes, payphones are still a thing. I had a pager. Those were the days.
Yep.
Yeah, you got a page. You had to like go find a phone and hope you had enough change to make the call, right? It just was the way it worked. So.
Oh yeah.
And yes, I know technically when I was in the Army, which was 1990s, early 90s. Cell phones existed, but I can tell you not everybody had them, and they were freaking expensive, and they were like bricks. Okay, they weren't the cell phones of today. Which it's now I think cheaper to have a cell phone than have a landline. But is what it is.
Yeah, I don't think we haven't had a landline. I think in about 17 years.
I haven't had one in a while.
Here in the house. I actually had I had stacked fence posts up against my house, and just during the course of doing the yard work, they fell over and sheared the telephone box off the side of the house.
Oops.
And I was like, that sucks. The telephone box is sitting out there in the outer garage now, and I put wire caps over the wires sticking out because on it I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, it's wire caps and duct tape solve a whole lot of problems in life, right?
Oh yes. But what's funny though is, and this goes all the way back. The first mobile phone I got was actually in 2002 as a fairly late adapter, and it was when my wife was pregnant with our first daughter, because I wanted to be able to get in touch with her or her in touch with me if anything came up. And it's kind of stuck with me even when we had a landline or whatever. I'm like, okay, I got to go. Crap, I can't find my phone. Hang on, guys, I got to find my phone. And then I always kind of laugh because I think, well, what did I do in, say, 2001 when I didn't have my when I didn't have a mobile phone at all? I just left the house like a crazy person without a phone. Now, no, I gotta take it with me.
I have a startup company. Well, it's not really a startup. We're in year 3 now, but we've got more employees than I thought we would at this point. I work at my office is over by this thing in Frisco, Texas, here, right by the Cowboys practice field. And yes, we can argue the Dallas Cowboys choked in the playoffs. And yes, I understand that the Green Bay Packers now have more playoff victories in AT&T Stadium than the Dallas Cowboys do. Get it? Okay, understand. But yeah, it's kind of funny for me to watch. There's a number of restaurants over there, and I actually will go in there with Diane or somebody, and every once in a while I'll look around. I'm like, okay, let's find the three people in here that don't have their face on their phone. And you watch these couples sitting there eating together, and they're not talking to each other. They're just doing this, right? Taking pictures of their food, posting it. I'm like, good Lord, put the damn phone down. Call it a day. Leave it alone once in a while. It's okay. Talk to somebody three-dimensionally. It's awesome. You should try it sometime. It's great.
Yeah, I try and remind myself of that. Like I've gone into the store, it starts to rain, and here in Florida, man, it comes in sideways.
Mm-hmm.
I've like run into the store, realized that my phone was in the car, and turned around and gone back out to get it. It's just the nature of the beast. But
It's funny now. You'll get people that'll text message you, and if you don't answer fast enough, they'll text message you back. Are you getting my text? Like, yeah, I just don't care. I'm busy with something else, three-dimensionally.
Well, I'm sure you've seen the memes too, where it's like, there's a picture of an AT&T trim line. Remember this thing? Remember fighting with your brothers and sisters to be the first person to pick it up when people would call you like some maniac without texting you first? We would just pick it up and talk to whoever was on the other end.
You picked it up. You didn't have caller ID. I mean, you just randomly answered the phone like you were insane. I mean, what? Come on, really?
Yeah.
And it got to the point where, and this was another one that I was talking to somebody about the other day. There was a point in time where when you got an email and you heard you've got mail and you went, oh my God. And it was like a special occurrence. Now I get something in the mail that's not a bill, right? Or something I ordered from Amazon, like, a Christmas card. I'm like, oh my God, I got a piece of actual mail. That's not, that's not somebody asking me for money. It's not something along those lines. It's actually something I want. So now it's kind of the other way. It's like email, you're like, oh dear God, I don't want to see it. And regular mail, you're like, ooh, regular mail. We've gone full circle. So
yeah, I remember. Gosh, I think it was late '89, early '90, and I had struck up a conversation as the record store I worked at was in a very heavily tourist trafficked area here in Central Florida. With someone, we were just talking about tech, and I don't even remember what it was, but I mentioned something about email, and he mentioned something about email, and I said, "Oh, you have an email address?" "Yes, I do." "Can I have it so we can email each other?" He's like, "Sure." So we traded email addresses for no other reason than just to be able to send each other an email. He was a guy from the UK. I want to say his name is Ashley or something like that. And it was just, hey, made it back to the UK. Oh, good to hear. It was nice to meet you. Just some exchange pleasantries, just to say we did it.
Exactly. So I got to ask you a Gamma World question, my friend.
Ask me a Gamma World question.
Since you guys are playing, and I haven't played in like 20 years, Gamma World used to be one of my favorites, right? It just was.
Okay.
I'm going to throw this out to your audience here in a minute, but a second role-playing game question. Since you've got the role-playing game audience, and I've been an RPG guy for years, I don't know if you can see it, by the way. My fiance gave me this pendant for Christmas, a little dragon head. It
so
opens.
Cool.
It opens, and it's got all the way through a D20 inside it, a little miniature one.
Oh, neat.
So, everywhere I go, I have dice with me. Anyway, so your Gamma World question, what's your favorite weapon in the Gamma World universe?
Ooh, well, I've just been game mastering, but I got to say, now my initial inclination is to say power armor, but that's more of a weapon system. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to have to go with Probably just your good old standard laser rifle. Yeah, I'm a fan of the laser rifle. How about yourself?
I don't know. Anything involving plasma devices has always been kind of my favorite, just because I worked in it. I don't know. Plasma just always sounded cooler to me, right? So it was kind of like, for whatever reason, I always liked just the word plasma. But that was just me. So the one I went throughout to your audience, I've been trying to do this for a long time. Okay? I have all the original Dragonlance modules from second edition when they came out, right? The ones that
Mhm.
the books are kind of loosely based on. Fusion Grenade's another good one. But I'm trying to put together a group of people to play the original Dragonlance modules, all by virtual tabletop. It ain't going to be in person because there's just not enough time in the world for everybody to fly to Dallas and go do that. So if anybody actually wants to play the original Dragonlance modules, please get in touch with me. I'm trying to put together a group to go do it. And everybody says, yeah, me. And then everybody, you come try to get everybody for a time in a day, and they're like, yeah, okay, forget it. So I'm trying to put the group together to play on Sunday evenings. Probably going to record it. Probably going to put it on a YouTube channel somewhere, just for the sake of doing it. If people want to join, great. If people don't want to join, I'm going to put this group together one way or the other, come hell or high water. And I will tell you that I have two people committed already, and I can't reveal their names yet because you would instantly recognize who you are. And once we're off the air, I will tell you so you can know. But I can't release them on the show yet because would cause people to show up just because it's them. So I kind of want to keep them secret until the whole thing launches. The other thing is I have not found a DM for this yet, and I haven't DM'd in 15 years. So I may wind up as the DM, and that's probably bad because I haven't in so long. But if anybody out there who wants to be a DM, please let me know as well.
Well, okay, there you go, guys. Engine Joe, I tell you what, I will try my best. Engine Joe, if you want to, my contact info is on the crawl down there. I will connect you and Tim together because it looks like we've already got one person ready to play, and I absolutely feel you as far as arranging times. I mean, I've got. I've got a my own typed messages are bouncing on the chat, but I've got this Monday night game that I've had going for a decade. It will literally be a decade this coming summer. First edition AD&D, but that group, it's has been as large as 15. It's 9 currently. But that was hard fought. That was exceptionally hard fought. And I mean, early sessions, it was like, okay, well, Joe can't be here, so that means it's just you and me.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, I guess we'll go do something else. But once I got 3 people coming consistently, and then I added a couple more, and it's just kind of grown and grown. And now it's to the point where it's like, if 4 people don't show up for the game, we play anyway, because we've got enough people, and just be like, Sapphire, the magic user, is strangely silent as she stands in the back of the party, and I can just plow ahead, and we can continue to play a good game. Not, mind you, that I'm saying that anyone at the table is disposable. I certainly not.
Yeah,
And there's a balance. It's like if 6 people don't show up, yeah, I'm probably going to cancel it because that's.
Yeah, you come across a monster too big, and you're kind of screwed at that point, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So, and I'm just going to throw this out to anybody, and please don't take this wrong. Anybody who plays, what he just said is exactly right. And the thing about playing Dungeons and Dragons, to me, it's not about what edition you play. It's not about it's about the people you're playing with that make it fun. I've been at some first edition tables I couldn't stand. I've been at some first edition tables I loved. I've been at 5th edition tables I couldn't stand, and 5th edition tables I loved. My personal favorite edition has nothing to do with the enjoyment I get out of the game. I learned on 2nd edition, so it's always kind of my go-to, just because you always go back to what you like. But it is about the people you play with. So when you see these edition flame wars going on, especially on Twitter, everybody has their favorite. But to me, this game is not about the edition or the rules. It's about the people you surround yourself with and how much fun you have with them. And honestly, and I'm going to throw this one over to our fun dungeon delver here. Is anything really a pure edition play anymore? When you sit down and play at a table, is it pure first edition, or is it some kind of first edition is the guide, and we kind of homebrew a lot of stuff anyway? it,
Well,
it,
I'll tell you, and I don't know if you can see it. I've got my OCE set up there. That's the only pure Dungeons and Dragons. That's it. It became impure when Gary published Supplement 1, Greyhawk. It became less pure than when Supplement 2, Blackmoor, came out. Supplement 3, Eldritch Wizardry, which brought in more and more and more and more. Now, Dungeon Delver, the old man yells at cloud kind of guy. And me, Bill Sylvie, the person, are, they're different. As long as I've said this before, Tim, and I'm going to say it again now. You've given me good opportunity to. I don't care which edition of D&D you play. Original D&D, any of the basics. First edition advanced, second edition advanced, third edition, 3.5, or fifth edition. All versions of D&D are good. Any of those are fine. As long as you're having fun, you're playing D&D the right way. Gary wanted people to get together and have fun, is what he wanted people to do. Hey, give me 5 minutes to tell you what I don't like about a given edition. Sure, absolutely. And I'll tell you why I love first edition AD&D. But for me, it's about doing a thing that you enjoy. I did I actually got a request from GitHub to run over the Christmas holiday, to run a D&D game for them. And none of these people, other than computer games, in this programming team had ever played D&D before. I was using the OD&D rules. Did they know? No. Did they care? Absolutely not.
Nobody cares.
And I did it because OD&D goes quickly, because they only had 3 hours to play. It was out of the middle of their workday. It was a holiday team building event. And so I said, absolutely. I knocked together some pre-gen characters before the game, handed them out when everybody joined the Zoom call, and we played, and we had an absolute blast. I had cameras pointed at the table, so we had miniatures and Dwarven Forge out. And the important thing was we had fun. If they had come to me and said, can you do this? Can you run 5th edition? I would have said, give me a day or two to polish up on the rules. What I would not have done, not the least of which because it was a paid gig, but still, what I would not have done is said, oh, about 5th edition, you get off my email. Don't ever contact me again. I don't want no.
Yeah, I just look at it like, as long as you're having fun, who cares, right? Just enjoy it. And I will tell you this, the next time I play 5th edition, I have always, ever since I kind of picked up the rule set, I do want to actually roll up a Dragonborn character just to say I played a Dragonborn Blue Dragon, because why not? Because breath weapons look like fun to me. I see it all the time, and I know this year Hasbro has something planned. I think they're planning on releasing a new edition at some point this year. And I know that the world's going to go crazy with the edition wars again. And I just hope that everybody kind of just takes a deep breath and enjoys playing. Don't scream at each other too much. I did manage to find out something, and I'm going to dig deeper into it, but apparently there are discussions going on about a second D&D movie.
Yes.
And I heard they're getting closer to an actual deal. So let's hope that actually takes place.
That's going to be a trick. I've been doing some interstitial videos, and I don't know how closely you follow the YouTube channel, but Hasbro's they're stumbling right now. They sold off their my buddy Ryan David actually talked about this, but they sold off their shares of the movie production company that they did the first D&D movie with to Lionsgate, the people at Wizards of the Coast who interfaced with the movie studios to do the D&D movies. They were all let go.
Mhm.
So I honestly, I don't know what's going on over there, but it's
Well,
I think when it comes to the movie, I'm going to say this: Heidi Gygax, Gary's daughter. We've had her on the show a lot of times. Really, really sweet woman. Her and her husband are awesome, awesome folks. They both agreed that Gary would have loved the D&D movie, the most recent one.
it
And
was fun.
that is the most. I think that is a ringing endorsement right there.
And the thing that got me about it is, who hasn't been at a table where you sit down and somebody wants to do 20 minutes of backstory and everybody else is like, oh my God, enough backstory already, right? I
Yeah,
mean, who hasn't been in that situation? And who also, like when the guy steps on the bridge and the bridge falls down, what dungeon master hasn't been, in a situation where somebody releases a trap and you're like, oh shit, now we're stuck. Oh, let's go miraculously find a little magic device right around the corner that kind of fixes this problem for us. Right? So everybody's
I
like,
have
"Oh yeah,
to say,
oh that was cheesy. That wouldn't happen." I'm like, "No, that's very real, true to the game. That's how some of this works sometimes." So,
I am going to
there's
say this. I think they missed a trick with the D&D movie. I really do. This is the best sports movie ever made, hands down. If you think otherwise, you're wrong. I'm objectively correct about this. Is Major League. Um, it is the best sports movie. Uh, Major League isn't just about one baseball game. It's not about how the baseball bat feels and how the baseball feels about being thrown. It is about people doing things outside of the baseball game. Tom Berenger trying to get back with his wife, the silliness with Charlie Sheen's rivalry with Corbin Burnson, all of that. I think all the D&D movies that there have been, and there were 2 direct-to-video, the stinker that came out in 2000 and the most recent one, I think they've really missed a trick by not bookending those as D&D games. Why not a post-credit scene where the entire cast is sitting around discussing what just happened in the movie, but as it happened at the table? Because honestly, you could make a fantasy movie, can it, put it on the shelf for a couple of years, and then say, "Oh crap, we need a D&D movie. Put D&D titles on this and send it out." You
yeah.
know, I think without a closer association with D&D, you kind of lose something. That's just my 2 cents. You've dealt a little bit closer to the entertainment industry. What's your take on it, Tim?
So, I mean, the entertainment industry is a weird place. Take it for what it's worth. But so you look at some of the careers that are out there and some of the people that have been in movies forever, and you're like, why? Why does this person still have a career? Like, why is Adam Sandler still making movies? Well, Kevin Smith or somebody was doing an interview. He's like, look, you can survive in Hollywood for as long as you want, as long as you remember one thing: don't lose the money. Your movies can break even as long as you don't as long as you don't lose money. And if you're going to write a movie or do a movie that loses money, you better have made a crap load before that, because if straight out the door you lose a dime, you ain't making another one ever, right? So it's very simple. You get your first movie deal, you make a few bucks. You get a second movie deal, you make a few more bucks, and you get bigger and bigger budgets, and they'll trust you more and more. That's how what's his name with the Transformers movie had a career, right? He never lost any money.
Mm-hmm.
It but that industry is very, very, very money focused. Like it or not, that's the way it works. There's no way they're going to keep pouring 60, 80, $100 million budgets at something if they're not getting that money back, right? They're not doing this as a charity. So the industry is a business like anything else. You can think it's art form, and maybe it is at some of the indie level, but it ain't in the big sense. And a fantasy movie done properly is not cheap, right? It's 80 to 100 million bucks at best.
Mm-hmm.
I think the D&D movie I want to say was 60 or something, 65. I want to say it wasn't 100. It was under that. if I from memory, and I'm working from memory, so I never trust my memory too much. But it wasn't a $200 million budget. It was way less than that. But if you look at how much it costs to do special effects, it's not cheap. And that gets into another question of, well, CGI versus AI versus human done uses this. Well, anything you can do to bring that cost down and still produce an entertaining product is what Hollywood's going to do. Right. And now there was a whole strike about AI, and I get that. But can you use AI? And I work in AI every day, so please forgive me for getting a little bit down in the weeds. My day job is AI. If you use AI not to write the movie, if you use AI not to be an actor, but if you use AI to create the special effects, would that make the movie even less expensive to make? Maybe it would. And I'm not
Mm.
sure that actually wound up in the Hollywood deals anywhere, but I can see that kind of becoming the next thing to bring those costs down. Is using AI special effects, which of course inevitably people will go crazy about, but that's okay.
Mhm.
But getting those movies made and getting them made properly, $150 million. Yeah, so that's not a cheap movie to make. So you've got to figure out how to get those costs down because people aren't going to the theater anymore. Right? They're just not. It's very rare. I actually go take the kids and go out to the theater and see something. It better be something I really want to go to.
Yeah.
Um, and it's not like it used to be an every Friday thing, right? It was like, hey, if it's Friday, we're going to the movies, right? And that's not the way it works anymore. And now it's, hey, we'll wait for streaming. So the economics are different. So you got to figure out how to bring that cost down. Is my point. And Hollywood's going to do anything they can to bring those costs down. And fantasy geeks like me and others are going to look for authenticity. I don't want it to look fake. I don't want it to look, whatever. So anything can be done to bring that down. And if you have to keep pouring 150, $200 million into them, there's not going to be a ton of them because there's not much getting greenlit that's at that price point anymore. It better be a guaranteed hit because at $150 million, whew, yeah, that's a big one to make back. And
Yeah.
yeah, Ghostbusters, I'm looking forward to that one too. Ghostbusters is a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm hyped about Ghostbusters, and that was one that survived a shall we say not good attempt at revival, and I'm glad to see.
So I'm going to talk about that one for a minute because two things. And one, it was filmed in Boston, and I actually know some of the state reps that got the tax benefits for them. Which the tax benefits, if you're not aware, in certain states, when a movie gets a tax break, it's not just a tax break on filming the movie. What they do is they write them a check
Mhm.
for 5, 6, 7, $10 million as a tax break, and then hey, you could pay it back later to the state. So the state's actually helping fund some of the movie with this tax break. And I can get down in the weeds on that if you want, but it'd take too long.
Mhm.
But that movie that was made, the 2016 version, every Ghostbusters 1, Ghostbusters 2, and even the new one that came out that was filmed out in wherever it was, the new one with the kids they made. Those movies were horror movies, sort of, that had some funny aspects to them. Okay, the 2016 version was a pure comedy that had ghosts. Right? So you have horror movies that are kind of funny or a comedy with ghosts, and it had ghosts, but it wasn't Ghostbusters to me. It
Yeah,
was cute. I had fun, but it just wasn't Ghostbusters, right? So the reboot was the reboot, and we just kind of live with it. I
yeah,
did enjoy it. So Mercury, I had fun watching it, but I am not going to watch it 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. And I've watched the original Ghostbusters a lot. So
yeah. Every I I would say on average 3 out of 5 streams that I do during the week, there will be a Ghostbusters reference slipped in there somehow. It's that good. I mean, I had a smorgasbord of in-flight entertainment I could watch on my little fold-up screen flying back from Atlanta back in October. And oh yeah, I watched Ghostbusters.
so
I remember exactly where it left off when I got there. They had
you think as a scientist, I've never used the line "back off, man"? I'm a scientist. I mean, come on,
of course.
it's just
Have
sitting
you
there.
have you ever described any of your physics experiments as imagine all life as you know it coming to an immediate stop and every molecule in your body exploding at the speed of light? Though.
No, but I have worked in nuclear physics, and I actually went to my supervisor at one point because so I worked. I was funded by this guy. I worked with this guy named Peter Fisher, and I worked with this guy named Ernie Fort. Worked with this other guy named Ernie Moniz. I was at MIT. Peter Fisher, I think, is the current department chair of physics at MIT, or he was for a while. He's still there, but I haven't talked to him in a while. Ernie was a dean. He was a big professor at MIT. He left to become Secretary of Energy under Obama. I used to work with both those guys. And I went to Ernie one day with this idea in nuclear physics, and I'm like, okay, I want to try this. I'm going to go in the lab. I'm going to do this and this and this. And Ernie, he looked at me and goes, "That's cool, but wait till next week." I was like, "Why?" He goes, "I'll be out of town." I was like, "What?" He's like, "Well, it's going to go one of two ways. It's either going to work a little bit or it's going to work a lot. And my office is too close to your lab for me to be in the office when you try this. Because if it works really well, your lab's going to be an interesting set of after satellite photos." And it's like, oh, let me go back and do some more math, right? So I was like, run back and like, okay, we're going to make this experiment a little smaller now. So we're going to try a little bit anyway. So it turned out it worked. We took this bunch of lab. I can get into details on quantum physics all day long, but let's finish. Let's suffice it to say we took a little lab sample and turned it from room temperature to the surface temperature of the sun in about 200 microseconds,
Nice.
which was a pretty decent temperature change involving using a microwave source that we pulled out of a microwave oven. So,
Timothy Imholt, were you lasing deuterium again?
maybe tritium,
And YouTube in Minecraft. Okay.
Minecraft.
He was doing it in Minecraft, the video game.
Exactly. Now this was in the licensed lab. We had Californian samples and everything, so we were perfectly allowed to do all this stuff. But yeah, anyway, that's right. I have told my kids that joke. My two boys who are now 14 and 12. I have told them that they're going to like split how they were working and stuff. Like, you go over there and work, I'll go over here and work. I'm like, yeah, spread out. You can destroy more stuff that way.
There you go. You know, and it's funny. It's the little, it's the snappy humor in there. It sounds like a strange go-to, but like my go-to joke, I won't say it's my favorite, but my go-to joke, like if my wife comes out and she's got her laptop bag and she's pulling her book bag, that's literally a small case that she carries books in, you know, they've got a, you know, the sec def is going to her office or whatever, and she's got to have a million things. You know, I'll see her in the morning and I'll just say, "What the hell are you supposed to be? Some kind of cosmonaut?" And without missing a beat, she'll say, no, somebody saw a cockroach up on third. You know? And it's such a great little interaction. I love the first Ghostbusters so much.
Oh, you're gonna laugh at this, but I'm engaged to a lovely woman. I got divorced a while ago, so I have kids outside of, and I'm in my 50s, so it's not my first rodeo, right? But
Right.
I'm getting remarried to a woman I've known for a very long time. We were friends for a long time. I was married, she was married. No, that's not the reason I got divorced, but anyway. When she was talking to me about moving in here, she goes, "Okay, I need to explain a few things." So we had this big long discussion about living together. She hadn't lived with anybody in a decade, so there was some sort of coming together. But you could tell she was freaked out because I have pets, right? And I'm a guy, I have kids, I have pets. I have a Jack Russell Terrier, no big deal, she has dogs. I have a tarantula that's
I've seen your tarantula on Twitter before.
It's huge. I mean, it's not small. And we have a corn snake. My daughter has a corn snake that you feed mice to. So she was like, "Okay, I'm just gonna have to. You're feeding them. I'm not feeding them, and I'm just gonna let you know right now. I think of them as living art. Please don't ever take them out of the cage." I was like, okay, deal. So, I do like my spider. You'll see my spider show up on Twitter from time to time. Its name is Blueberry, by the way. It's a green bottle blue, so it's blue, it's black, it's got some brown. It's a very pretty spider. And my daughter's corn snake is actually an albino corn snake, so it's sort of orange and pink. It's a very pretty snake. But some people get a little disturbed by watching it eat mice. So.
Yeah, I got living in Florida. I have enough wolf spiders in my walls and attic that I don't need one in a cage in the room. I have a deal with them, and I hope they're listening. They stay hidden. That's just fine. Eat the ants, eat the mosquitoes, eat the cockroaches, knock yourselves out. I catch you scuttling across the floor. It's go time. As in, I will go get my shoe and pound that sucker.
Yeah, it's like
balls.
I think the one that truly freaked her out was the day she realized the spider can actually crawl up the side of the glass cage. And it has done that and spun webs.
I didn't, like, have you just been waiting the entire stream to tell me that they can do that? Because that's horrible.
Oh, they can. They can. Because this one is crawled up, and there's actually spider webs connected to the glass about halfway up. So it you can actually get this on.
That's by the way, that is everybody talks about unarmed combat, psionics, blah blah blah. Gary, if I could go back in time during the many conversations I had with you, I would just shake you gently by the shoulders and say, why did you have spider nomenclature the way you did? Because in AD&D, spiders are huge, giant, and large. Well, what the hell size? Like, it's a huge spider. It's as big as the table, like Shelob. No, a huge spider is that big. Oh, so I guess a large spider is a little smaller, a little bigger. No, a large spider is like the size of a pony. What? Gary? So
I will tell you this. I got somebody put magic missile in the chat. So magic missile is one of my favorite spells ever. Okay. For low level mages, it's fantastic. I love that spell. And the reason that spell sticks in my head was my dad was a big into Avalon Hill games, and when I was a kid, I didn't know how to DM. I just got in D&D. I was like 12 years old. So my dad being nice and sat down and he's like, okay, I'll figure out how to DM, right? So he figured out how to DM. And I was annoying him at a game one night, and I was like, okay, I'm going to cast Magic Missile. And he's like, yeah, that was great, but unfortunately, your finger was up your nose when you cast it. You blew your brains out. Game over.
Oh, man.
Oh, man. He's like, now, would you actually pay attention to the game and stop messing around? I was like, yeah, okay.
Although I will say, I think I love Magic Missile too. Sleep is the better spell for a low-level magic user. I call it Sleep Ball instead of Fireball, because you're in that room, there's 12 kobolds, you drop a sleep spell on them, and then the party can move to contact and clean up the ones that are still awake. Magic Missiles are good when you hit like 5th level, because then you're throwing out 3 magic missiles.
Pretty cool, right? It's cool stuff. So my daughter, so there is a Dungeons. Amazon has a Dungeons and Dragons Shirt of the Month club. You get a shirt a month for like $18. And I started subscribing when I got divorced about 2 years ago. And I said, I'm going to cancel the subscription when I start getting repeat shirts, and it hasn't happened yet. I've got like 26 of them in there now.
Excellent.
It's funny because I wear them all the time, and my 10-year-old daughter, gets so embarrassed because people will come up to me and talk about the shirts, like, "Oh, you play?" I'm like, "Yeah, I do." Yeah, it's like, "Oh, people just want to talk about it, right?" And the one that gets me every time, I have one that says, "I don't care how big the room is, I say cast Fireball." Right? I was in the grocery store with my daughter one day, and some on the other side of the 20 feet up the aisle looked down and just started laughing, and my daughter's like, "Dad, they're laughing at your shirt." They're like, "I'm laughing at it, but not because of the shirt. That's funny. I've had people do that in a game." I was like, who hasn't had that problem where a mage gets a little overexcited and wants to use Fireball in the wrong place?
Oh yeah. That actually came up the Tuesday night live stream where we live stream first edition ADD here on the show, which you might enjoy it. Our party magic user had a wand of fireballs and was detonating it in a room full of undead. And he's like, "I want to know how big this room is." And I'm like, "You can see through the door, but you're not in the room. And the room is nowhere near big enough to contain a fireball." But the Temple of Evil Chaos in that part of the Caves of Chaos is described as having 30 feet ceilings. Well, one of the first things you learn about volumetric measurements when you're a kid and you play D&D is a fireball is 33 10 by 10 by 10 squares. And as luck would have it, that room had a 30-foot ceiling. despite the fact that it was only 11 grid squares. So there was your 33 10 by 10 by 10 squares. So he fired it in there, and it didn't lead to the party getting reduced to ash. So that was probably a good thing.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I've tuned in for some of your games. You'll have to have me sit in on one of them at some point. I might wreak some havoc, and the DM will get annoyed and kill me off. It happens.
I'm not opposed to having a guest at the table as long as I get to find new and amusing ways to end their characters' lives.
So you know Margaret. I'm sure you know. Everybody knows who Margaret Weiss is, right? So,
Yes.
Wonderful lady. I've got a bunch of her books autographed. Fantastic. She's on Twitter. She's on Instagram, Facebook. I think she's not on Twitter quite as often as she once was because she doesn't like Elon Musk that much. But anyway, she put something out one day I thought was hilarious. She loves to play Kender, which is my favorite thing to play. Right? Kender are just fun because it's difficult to play them correctly, right? Kind of the way they're meant to be done. But she's sort of the master at it. So what she does when she starts a session and she's playing a Kender, which is her go-to, and I agree with her. Tasselhoff Burfoot was the brains of the operation in the original Dragonlance trilogy, and anybody who wants to argue it was wrestling is wrong. But the way she plays it is she goes to the DM. Okay, I need you to take one item out of everybody's pouch and put it in mine, but don't tell me or them what it is. So the dungeon master gets to select one item from everybody's pouch to give to the Kender. You can't tell the Kender what it is, and you can't tell anybody in the party either. It just sort of accidentally ends up in the Kender's pouch.
This is when the only thing I carry in my bag is a sphere of annihilation. I reach in, you don't reach out.
There you go.
I
thought it was a genius way to play a Kender, though. I'm like, that's actually.
Hey, I mean, if you're gonna have them in your game and you're gonna run them, that sure, absolutely. But Graph Paper says that I will play a dwarf fighter named Sean Bean. So any guest you have on the show has to play Sean Bean, and they die during the adventure. Genius. But
lose your head.
Yeah. I actually got a little heart response from Margaret. I took I photoshopped the leaves of The Last Home. You know, there's that lovely hand painted sign on there, and I just photoshopped the sign to say "Murder all the Kender." She got a kick out of
that. If you can't have fun while you're playing, what's the point, right? And Kender are just, it's funny to me, like you bring people into the game for the first time and everybody wants to be mage or fighter, and that's great. But mage are a little trickier to play than people give them credit for because you have to make sure you have spell components and there's all kinds of little ins and outs. Yeah. So they're a little bit trickier. But if you really get into it, honestly, anything I've seen over the years, the toughest ones to get right are Kender. And chaotic or even if you get down to it, neutral thieves. How do you play a neutral thief? That just doesn't work. But Kender are just sort of the toughest ones to really get correct. Everybody, I've seen people over the years try to do it, and they're sort of not quite right. So next up, I love playing them, and I think Margaret's fantastic idea. I think our idea of how to really play them correctly is just fantastic. I'm going to have to try that next time. But she's been at this a long time, so she's obviously had a lot of time to think about it. She's written a zillion books with dragons in them now.
Yeah, I actually this is kind of a bittersweet story. A dear friend of mine who I do a tribute to him on the show every year to remember his passing. His name was Eric Peterson, and Eric's DM was Tracy Hickman before Tracy went to TSR. And I have his widow and I are in touch. She is trying to find Eric was a voracious reader and had just tons of stuff in storage. She's trying to find some of the things that he said that Tracy Hickman had given to him before he was like, yeah, I'm going to go work for TSR. Here's some copies of some stuff. You might enjoy this. my hope is, and I know she doesn't watch the show, so the surprise won't get to her. My hope is to get those, check the authenticity of them, and then auction them and give her the proceeds. That's my hope. But if I can find those, believe me, I will tell the world. I will shout it from the highest mountain. Because Eric was an awesome dude, and his wife is a wonderful person. So,
a lot of so I've actually, I've been around. I was at MIT a long time. I met a lot of people over the years, and what I'm finding is a great generation of authors who kind of built a lot of things are passing away, right? And
yeah.
what's happening, even like artists are passing away and others. And you take any of them. Like there was an author who wrote a series of books called Warbots that was out of print that actually helped rescue and put back in print. Got them out of Pinnacle's hands and put them back on the market. They were
Mhm.
about these goofy things like robots fighting wars for us that are what we call drones now.
Mhm.
But when it came out in the '80s, it wasn't really a big deal. Everybody's like, no, 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 never happened. Well, now it's kind of going on. And so they're back out on the market if anybody wants them. But I talked to the guy who his son. So the guy who wrote him passed away, and I had to go look up his son to try to rescue the things. And his son was like, I got like 4 storage containers full of like artwork and stuff my dad had for the books. I've got all these unfinished manuscripts and whatever else. And it got me thinking, and I started calling some other folks around. And then I watched this documentary on Bob Ross, and apparently he did a couple of practice paintings for every painting he did on the show, and the show was on forever. Right, so his
Right.
daughter was going through things, and she has these storage facilities, or had at one point these storage facilities full of all of his paintings that were the practice ones. And what do you do with them, right? She's got this crap pile of Bob Ross stuff out there, and I think she's slowly auctioning off for charity or something. But you're finding a lot of these things where certain people have just storage units full of this stuff that they don't know exactly what it is, and you and I look at it like, oh my god, that's gold, right? And give me the gold, I want the gold, and they're about ready to just check it and throw it away. So I wish you luck on the journey. I hope you can save it because that's just getting
Yeah.
harder and harder to ID and harder to find.
It really is. And I tell you what, I could pin you down probably for another 3 hours just talking about the peripheral stuff that is going on, the public stuff, the public knowledge stuff that's going on at to do with Gary's estate,
Yeah.
the things that he wrote. It's a mess, and I'm just going to leave it there. As this would become a very depressing conversation. It's a mess, and I've as I've told the audience, I said, look, if I croak tomorrow, format my hard drive and contact Paul Stormberg and sell all my autographed Gygax stuff. Pay for the cremation, and then that's it. Don't worry about any more of this stuff. But yeah, and just last week, of course, Janelle Jacques passed away. The RPG author group, the first generation of creators who built this hobby that I so love, and that the audience, I'm sure you obviously have a great appreciation for it too.
Mm-hmm.
That first generation of creators they're moving on,
Yeah.
and as I said before, guys, if you get a chance to meet these people, take it. Go to the con, walk up to them, ask for an autograph, tell them what your favorite book was. So
And
that,
most of them absolutely love it, right? So
yeah,
um, I was talking to somebody online earlier about Terry Brooks. And so, I was kind of embarrassed to walk up and ask him to sign my dog-eared copy of whatever it was, but he was really nice about it. He's like, "Oh my God, it shows you actually read it, right?" And authors love talking to people because you don't really get a chance. I can speak as one, right? You don't really get a chance to do that very often as a writer,
yeah,
unless your name is Stephen King, and then anybody will try to book him on a show. But they absolutely love it when people who have really read their stuff come up, and I love it. Like even on some of my work, where people have come up like, okay, I read your book and I disagree with you on this part. Great, disagree with me. Let's discuss it. but first off, it's fiction, so you can't really say, well, it's not real. I'm like, well, of course it's not real. I blew up 5 nuclear weapons in the book, right? So,
Right.
one of them was in Dallas, right? So and I'm still here. I love having those discussions. Somebody who's actually read through the book. And I wrote this book about a serial killer priest that went eye for an eye and took it pretty far. And I had I've had people come up to me and like, okay, the murder scene where you did this, that was just wrong. I'm like, was it? Was it? And, one person looked at me like I was completely sick and twisted, and my fiance said she actually read through that book in 2 days, but can't get through my other ones. So she was at least honest about it, and said she liked that one a lot. But there were a few things in that book that people kind of looked at and went, "Oh my God, that's sick and twisted. Where'd you come up with that idea?" I'm like, "Yeah, I was just sitting around one day and it seemed like a good idea." But as an author, you get to sit there and live through those things, and every one of them, if you get a chance to go up and talk to them about their stuff, and you've actually read it, fantastic. And going to those cons is exactly the right thing to do. And
Mhm.
if you're not if an author like me, we do put a lot of thought into things like cover art. We actually do put thought into this kind of stuff. It's not, we don't ever have the same budgets they had in the early days of TSR, so we can't really grab some of those guys and ask them to do stuff for us. But everything from the cover art to the end of the book, we put great thought into doing. So if you've read it, if you've looked at it, if you have an actual want to sit down and have a discussion about it, most authors will do it if they've got the time. Right? And I don't know too many that turn those moments down. Because I've even seen Margaret Weiss and Tracy show up on podcasts and talk for an hour about stuff. And she's much more prolific than I am.
Yeah.
So they'll do it if you're polite and you reach out with honest questions. Most of them will answer. If it's like, "Oh, I love your work, can I have an autograph?" Well, if that's all you're asking for, sure. But it'd be nice to know why you love the work. What did you enjoy about it? Those kinds of things really get our attention a lot more.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I mean, I can honestly say, as someone who cannot write a lick of prose, but I do write a lot of D&D stuff, I have never had that problem. Nobody has ever come up to me and said anything about my stuff. So,
especially the priest serial killer. I've had people who you could tell didn't read it that sent me hate mail, and I'm like, I think it's just the fact that I turned a priest into a serial killer. That set some people off, and I'm like, look, if my little fiction book can so shake your religious beliefs, I think I did something right.
yeah,
I've heard that about Neil Gaiman also, but he's also not American, so it might just be cultural differences. But I can tell you, like, I've talked to David Baldacci, I've talked to a number of David Morrell, I've talked to some others that are very big names, and they're all very giving with their time. They're all incredibly nice, and that was before I'd written anything.
yep.
I was just some goofy scientist, right, bugging him about stuff, and um, it. They're great. Just have something. Yeah, Diocese Dilemma is the priest killer.
Yeah.
That's actually my newest one, so that's that one. And the big premise of the book was, and I'll let people have this one. We all have seen the Catholic Church cover. I grew up Catholic, so I was baptized. I went all the way through confirmation. But we've all seen the Catholic Church news stories confirmed that they've admitted to a lot of abuses that went on. And my quest with this book was, would they cover up a serial killer in their midst, or would they turn him over to the cops? Right. And if he's just taking out people who are sinners, would the cops care? Because he's just taking out bad guys. So,
Right.
nope, I don't have any new books. This is the most recent. I'm working on part 3 of the Last World War series one, which now has a screenplay attached to the first book. So.
Excellent. There is. Have you ever? I swear I've linked to this before, but do you follow 1987 World War III, the blog?
I have seen it. I wouldn't say I follow it.
Okay. We've had him on the show before and everything. He actually got his book put in turnaround when the Ukraine war started, because his publisher was like, I don't know about publishing this just right now. So he's kind of it's on hold, so to speak. So hopefully he'll get that. He'll be able to get that out. But I'm looking forward to reading the Last World War series. That looks like good stuff. So once done there, what's next?
Oh, you never know, right? So I'm the chief technology officer of a company, so I'm usually that's where my day job goes.
Right.
But as far as publishing, I think the Last World War Part Three is really what's coming up next. Mike, my co-author, and I. So my co-author is a guy I've known since the '80s. I work with him on most of the stuff. He's a former combat medic, so you'll find a lot of our injuries get a little up close and personal. He was in Iraq and Afghanistan. He's Purple Heart kind of guy. Purple Heart and a Silver Star, actually. But he wants to write the second part to the serial killer book because we left it open for a second one. So I'm kind of plinking away on this third one in the Last World War series, and he's kind of plinking away on the second one in the Diocese Dilemma. And sooner or later, we'll kind of trade. But it's probably both of those are going to be what comes up. I've been getting this one a lot on Twitter because I do read a lot of fantasy books. People who've read some of my stuff are like, "Oh, I'd love to see you write an epic fantasy." First off, writing a book that holds together for 350 pages is a little harder than people think it is. Okay? And I write action thriller, techno thriller kind of stuff because I am an Army veteran and I understand technology. I've worked in it a long time. So these kind of make sense to me. Uh, Growing up Catholic and wondering about the goofy guy, the weird, scary guy in the box you go tell everything you've done wrong to, that led me to write the Diocese Dilemma. But building a fantasy world is a level of writing that I don't think people have an appreciation for just how hard that is to do. Because you've got to dive into and build an entire world, and you've got to do it making a lot of people happy who know more about elves, magic users, and dwarves than I do. Right? And they're going to come rip me apart if I get it anything wrong. So the amount of research that goes into doing an epic fantasy is a whole lot more than people give it credit for. And people
Yeah.
that can do it and do it well I think are fantastic writers, and hats off to them because I'm not that person. I'm just not that talented. Action thrillers I can do all day long, and that's what I enjoy doing, and that's where I'm probably keep working. But I don't see myself doing fantasy. I'll keep that for playing D&D.
Well, there you go. So, uh, what is the best way if somebody wants to get a hold of you and they're not on Twitter? What's the best way for them to reach out to you directly if they don't want me to go between for that Dragonlance session you got coming?
You can send me a direct message on Twitter, or you can go through my website, timothyimholt.com, and just fill out the comment section. It's an email that comes straight to me.
And we got a question from Vaughn there. What do you think defines the espionage genre?
Espionage, the sort of spy world, is a little different than it used to be. It was pretty easy when the USSR and the United States were going back and forth with each other, and we had the Cold War going on, right? It was a little bit different then. You had James Bond, you had a bunch of these guys running around in that space. And now it's a little different, right? And I'm not sure where the whole genre is really going to go because it's a little tougher for us to get spies into the Middle East because nobody trusts anybody with family, and unless you're turning a family member, it's really hard to really do espionage correctly over there. So where that whole genre is going to go, I don't know. Um, Personally, I like writing the techno thriller stuff because I understand it. As far as espionage books go, I don't know where it's going to go in 15 years, right? So James Bond, is sort of the last great one of those out there, and even the last couple of there were one or two duds in the last 4 or 5 movies. Some of them worked great, but Casino Royale was amazing, right? So some of them were fantastic, some of them were yeah. But I really don't know where it's going to go because you don't really have a Cold War anymore to keep that stuff alive unless we start a new arms race with somebody or a new tech race with somebody. But our tech has already come so far. I'm not sure what else you do. Right? How do you have a queue, that really has really cool techno gadgets after what they've already pulled off in the movies? So I honestly don't know the answer to that. Techno thrillers, I think, still have a home because you can kind of put those anywhere in the world. But the one that I really want to get into, and I think part 3 of the Last World War series is going to do it, is I don't think there's been too many epic sci-fi out there, or too much sci-fi that people can kind of relate to. There's Star Wars or Star Trek. There's those sort of things that came out in the 60s, 70s, and 80s that people kind of cling to. But there's, other than David Weber, there's not really been a sci-fi author out there that's kind of been moderate to big. And David Weber's still probably B-list kind of author. He's a Baen Books guy. But I think my work is probably going to go into the sort of military sci-fi space as much as
Mhm.
anything.
Right on. Right
So,
on.
and I think that's probably more the future than espionage, unless we, come up with espionage versus aliens or something, and that's a little tougher. But I guess
Yeah.
V did it, so.
Well, all right. Well, listen, man, it has been an absolute gas to have you on the show. You're going to come back, right?
Yeah, you just pick the time. I'll come back.
All right. Excellent. Excellent. So thank you, everybody in the audience, for your questions and hang out. This is your last chance. Any parting questions on Tim before he's on the show again?
Yes, Stephen Donaldson, I'll agree. It was a good book, good series of books. So,
And I guess you probably heard this back when it happened in December. We lost David Drake.
yeah, I know.
That was a shame. Hammer. I can't say that I loved Hammer Slammers because those, as I said when I wrote on Twitter, those were ugly books. Like, he did not pull punches. Like, yeah, Space Wars, it's cool. No, it was like, no, it's war. Period is not cool, and this is what it's like up close.
Yeah, it gets glorified. As an Army veteran, I will tell you that a lot of times things get glorified, and so it's heroic to go off, blah blah blah. I think it was Patton said it best. It is not heroic to die for your country. The opportunity, the thing you should do is offer the other poor dumb son of a bitch the opportunity to die for his country.
Yeah,
The best thing you can do, right? So
yeah,
I think we glorify it a lot, but it is a dirty, nasty business, right? I mean, I've got marks all over me from some stuff when I was in. Mike, one of my best friends on the planet, I've known since high school. We joined the army together. He's a Purple Heart and a Silver Star.
Mhm.
So people die doing this, and they get ripped to shreds. One of my big projects when I was working in defense was bulletproof glass. It's not bulletproof. I get it, but it went into a lot of Humvees and MRAPs on the stuff I designed, and I actually used to get thank you notes from people that would look up who designed the glass that just saved their life, right? Uh, and then they'd send pictures of how they were injured and how it would have been worse had it not been for the glass. And working on traumatic brain injury with the Army, I spent time at Walter Reed looking at some soldiers that were coming back with horrific injuries, and that was after we improved the armor like by factors of 10. So it's a thing that happens. It's something that goes on in the world. I know that we're never going to be 100% safe from warfare. It's just going to go on, but um, it's not fun, right? It's not something you're like, yeah, I'll go be Rambo. Well, it's not the way you think.
And Drake was very good at portraying that with his work, so he'll definitely be missed. But anyway, thank you again, Tim, for being here. Thank you to our audience. We're going to have you back real soon. And again, guys, if you want to play Dragonlance AD&D with a guy, you can reach out to me. You can reach out to him on his website. Don't miss the opportunity. As for me, we'll be back tomorrow night playing some First Ed Gamma World. I'll disintegrate someone in your honor.
As long as it's with a plasma grenade, we're good.
All right. But until then, guys, be good to each other, and please do be careful and watch out for the owl bears. Peace.
Have you seen my owl bear? Here's to all the weirdos everywhere in the woods and in the air. Have you seen my owl bear? Should I shave off all my hair? Bobs are all around. Some live in tunnels underground. Some are fat, some are rich, some are sleeping in a ditch. Can you ride a crooked horse without a saddle way off course? naked as a toad, all the way to Smoky Joe's. Have you seen the little creep driving fast in his little green Jeep? He smells like fish and brandy, but his rotten teeth look dandy. Take me to the show, I don't care if fast or slow. From action flicks to dancing dicks, just take me to